Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 1 to 2 and 12 to 15. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man, and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created. Hebrew baw-raw, till iniquity was found in thee. Ezekiel 28 describes the king of Tyrus as someone who was created. Hebrew baw-raw, which happens to be the same Hebrew word used in Genesis when describing all of God's perfect creation in the beginning, which included Adam and Eve. Furthermore, the king was also described as having been in Eden, the garden of God. The king of Tyrus was obviously no ordinary human, which was probably why he thought that he was God, or at least he wanted to be one. He was also described as an anointed cherub that covers, which led many commentators of Ezekiel 28 to conclude that the king of Tyrus was either Satan or possessed by him. But the question is, was Satan a cherub? Fortunately, the book of Ezekiel gave us a good description of how cherubs look like, so we can then compare it with how Satan was described elsewhere in the Bible. Ezekiel chapter 10 verse 1. I looked and I saw the likeness of a throne of lapis lazuli above the vault that was over the heads of the cherubim. This verse tells us that God's throne of lapis lazuli rests on a vault that was over the heads of cherubim. Now the following verses called these cherubim as four living creatures and gave us a detailed description of their appearances. Ezekiel chapter 1 verses 4 to 8, 10 to 11, and 26. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like four living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had four faces and four wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings on their four sides, they had human hands. All four of them had faces and wings. Their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a human being, and on the right side each had the face of a lion, and on the left the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. They each had two wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on either side, and each had two other wings covering its body. Above the vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli. Heavenly cherubs or cherubim have the form of a human with four wings and feet like a calf. And depending on viewing orientation, their faces can either look human, a lion, an ox, or an eagle. Compare this description on how Satan was described in the Bible. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, had God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 and 9. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Satan was described as either an ancient serpent or an enormous red dragon that can be seen in heaven. This red dragon, I believe, is the same one referred to as the fiery flying serpent in the book of Isaiah. See Isaiah chapter 14, verse 29, and Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6. Now there is a type of celestial or heavenly beings originating in ancient Judaism known as the seraphs or seraphim. A seminal passage in the book of Isaiah, see Isaiah chapter 6 verses 1 to 8, used the term to describe 6 winged beings with hands and feet that fly around the throne of God crying, Holy, Holy, Holy. Thus, seraphs differ from cherubs in the number of their wings, with cherubs having only 4, while seraphs have 6. The word seraph, seraphim, appears 4 times in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6 verse 2, chapter 6 verse 6, chapter 14 verse 29, and chapter 30 verse 6. In Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2 and chapter 6 verse 6, the term is used to describe a type of celestial being or angel, while the other uses of the word refer to the fiery flying serpents which I mentioned a while ago. Thus, contrary to popular opinion, Satan was not a cherub. He was a seraph instead. So clearly, Satan could not have been the anointed cherub that covers mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 14. It was Adam, who I believe was an earth cherub, having the same appearance as heavenly cherubs, except that Adam's body is made of flesh and not of spirit. Thus Adam had 4 wings and feet like a calf before he ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Also, instead of using 1 set of wings for flying like heavenly cherubs do, Adam used them to cover his face like seraphs. See Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2. But just like the cherubs, he used his other set of wings to cover his body or nakedness, and not his feet like the seraphs do. With his face covered by his wings, Adam was able to see only objects that are closer to his face than his wings that cover it. However, sometime after Adam ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, his body was transformed. He lost all his 4 wings, and his feet became what is currently considered as human feet. By losing his 4 wings that cover his face and body, Adam's eyes were suddenly opened. He can now see from afar, and for the first time he saw his and his wife's nakedness. Genesis chapter 3, verses 6 to 7. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Adam used his calf's feet to jump high and reach for the fruits of the tall trees found in the Garden of Eden. After losing these strong feet, he was able to eat only herbs that grow low in the field or the ground, thus limiting his diet to bread made out of it. Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 to 19. And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. And thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. Satan also underwent transformations in his body after receiving God's punishment. His wings, arms, and legs were removed, forcing him to crawl on his belly. Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. So the Lord God said to the serpent, Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. Thus, from a winged serpent with arms and legs, which is how a dragon is portrayed, Satan's body was transformed into a common serpent, which we see today. Now if Adam was the anointed cherub that covers mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 14, this means Adam reincarnated as the king of Tyrus, whose heart was lifted up, thinking and believing that he was God. And this means Adam's burning desire to be equal with God, which caused his fall from grace at the Garden of Eden, lingered on many years later when he became the king of Tyrus. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, Did God actually say, You shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Now the story of Adam did not end in his reincarnation as the king of Tyrus. This is because I believe Adam reincarnated once again as the much dreaded Gog of the land of Magog, who is prophesied to make an apocalyptic war with Israel during the end of days. I will be discussing this topic in my next video titled, Gog and Magog, who are they? The answer will shock you.